Hello everyone and welcome back in Vienna in the press center for the second episode of this season of the ESC Daily Show. I'll be discussing the recent Eurovision developments tonight with Ewan Spence for ESC Insight.
Hello.
And with Sietse Bakker, Event Supervisor for the EBU.
That's right.
Can you tell me, Sietse, how is everything going so far from your point of view to this Eurovision?
All going very smooth. Our ref is very prepared. They're also very experienced. That helps a lot. So it's dealing with the small stuff, but the devil is in the details, so we're trying to get it perfect every day.
All right. Rehearsals have been going on for at least 4 days now, so let's take a look at what we've seen so far from the second semi-final. Sweden, one of the big favorites for this year's competition, Måns Zelmerlöw and Heroes. We're looking at rehearsal footage from his first performance here on the big stage, and this is him at the press conference where he explains more about the changes that he had to make with his stickman due to copyright claims. And of course this, what we're going to see in a few seconds, is the move he makes at the end of the song, looking like a real winner. Press conferences from Latvia then, where Aminata made a acoustic performance of her song Love Injected, which may even sound a bit better than the one she actually did on stage. This is Elnur from Azerbaijan. He participated before in 2008, now he was one of the favorites, but his scores at the bookmakers dropped after this first rehearsal that you're looking at right now, and this is the duet from Norway, one of the many duets this year. We'll be talking about that. Ewan, can you tell me which countries, Norway maybe for example, or one of the others, stood out for you when you saw the rehearsals of the second semi-final?
I think Norway has one of those stunning performances that I honestly find it difficult to judge. See, we've lived with these songs, whether we be writers or whether we be behind the organisation, for months. So it's really not up to us to make stands out, because what's standing out to us is because we've seen it 3 or 4 times every day, or we've listened to it all the time. Norway's is a great example. There's a 10-minute pause and 10-second pause in there that sometimes feels like 10 minutes to me, but it doesn't matter what I think about it. It matters how that is conveyed over at home. I know that there's a pause coming. I know that there's a big crescendo at the end. So for me, the tension that's required at that moment in Norway, it isn't there anymore, but it was there the first time I watched it. So everybody watching at home, for most of them, it'll be the first time they've seen it. Norway's staging hasn't changed that much since MGP, and certainly the countries that select later in the run, closer towards that March deadline, tend to have similar presentations to that they have had in their national final. Sweden is another key example there, with issues notwithstanding that everybody's aware of. Not having a list of semi-final 2 in front of me, I'll have to be a really bad fan and look at the lists now. That's terrible, isn't it? But semi-final 2, Czech Republic really stood out for me actually. Out of the Thursday night shows, there's a sort of animal raw power that is coming out on there, and the Czech Republic have the advantage that they are on their best result ever. I think that's the only guaranteed thing we have out of the entire Eurovision.
Are there any guarantees?
Yeah, because they've never finished higher than 19th in a semi-final. So even if they come dead last on Thursday, they're 17th, and they will have bettered their last result.
I still doubt if they will be happy if they score 0 points again.
Well, it depends how you spin it.
For you, that must be difficult, because I ask him for his favorites. You can never give your favorites because you should be neutral to every country.
Absolutely. So I don't do that either, except a very small group of people. But over the years, like Ewan just said, you see the rehearsals, you see them on stage, and only then you can really say, is this going to work or not? We've seen with the Netherlands last year, no one gave it any chance to do anything, not even qualify. And in the end, it was probably the staging that made all the difference and helped them to get to the second spot.
And to be fair, even though we've seen the rehearsals, we still don't know if it's going to work. To stay with the Netherlands, there's been a radical change between Tech Rehearsal 1 and Tech Rehearsal 2 that changes the tone of that song. And
it's so much better if you see everything right after each other too, right? Because now you see 6 times the same song, and it's much easier if you see the whole show.
Yeah, and that's the way that the people at home look at it. And what a lot of some journalists, but also people out there, don't realize is that people don't pick the song they're going to vote for from 16 or 17 or even 27. They pick it from 4 or 5 that they remember for various reasons, and then out of that small selection, then they make up their mind. So the key is to get into that first sort of rough shift, and then when you have that list, then you can make up your mind and vote.
At the background we hear Russia have its second rehearsal. Last year you were on our show, we spoke about the possibility of countries like Russia, for example, being booed. You thought it would be very childish for people to do that, but it happened last year. How do you guys look forward to that, like when if it possibly happens this year again? Have you thought about taking measurements towards that? To make it sure that, for example, that it cannot be heard on TV or something like that?
Well, absolutely. After last year, it was very embarrassing to see those two young girls being booed, probably for other reasons than the quality of the song or their performance. And that's unfortunate, because the Eurovision Song Contest is a non-political event. It should remain a non-political event. But unfortunately, this still happened, and we really hope that the audience will think twice this year. Of course, people can boo if they really don't like the song or if they think it's a poor performance. But if they boo for political reasons, we also have, as EBU, an obligation to all the participating broadcasters to deliver a signal that is free from political statements. And I think we can then safely say that would be a political statement.
Is that why you've been rehearsing with these tapes? Because I hear applause coming from when we see the rehearsals. Has that something to do with that?
No, that has nothing to do with that. We've done that in previous years. You test all the different audio volumes, the levels between applause, venue sound, TV sound, and so on, and that's what you need it for. We are still considering what to do, whether we should address the audience, whether we should, as you say, sweeten the volume, should there be any booing. No decision has been made about that, but bottom line, we really hope that the audience, especially the fans of the song contest, will understand that this is not the right place to make such statement.
So, Ewan, which kind of entries throughout the years have had such an experience? It's not always for political reasons, is it?
There's booing for a lot of reasons. The political is one of them, and I think it's worth stressing that if you look back at the tapes, the booing that we heard last year was when the country was mentioned and not the act that was mentioned. It was about the country. So the Tomaszewski sisters, although they did have to take the brunt of it, the booing was when Russia was introduced, but not the Tomaszewski sisters. That's one area of booing. There have been other areas where I think the phrase Sylvia Knight springs to mind. It was almost like the audience felt that she was bringing the contest into disrepute, and booing is a very blunt weapon. It's impossible to know why an entire audience is booing, because others will be joining. Some people will be booing for one reason, some people will be booing for another. With Sylvia Knight, some people might have been cheering, or they might have been catcalling, or they might have been booing. But that's one country there. I seem to remember that there was issues in 2008 with Serbia as well, in terms of the results that came through from the national final. But that's hazy in the mind, and everybody watching will now correct me, and I will go, I am a bad fan, I am sorry, and I shall move on. Fans should leave booing until it is something that is the only way for their voice to be heard. In geopolitical terms, the Russia issue is full. Everybody's fully aware of the stance of Russia in certain areas, and those areas that affect some of the audience at the Eurovision Song Contest. I think the booing of Russia is too blunt an instrument at Eurovision. We all know how certain parts of the community feel about Russia, but at the same time, there are Russian fans in the audience. When you're booing a country, you're booing the individuals on stage. We're not feeling that it's every individual in Russia that's causing this problem. It's the higher ups, it's the politics, it's the government in Russia, and the honest answer is if you were Putin and you had that sort of message coming through, you would use that to best effect. In actual fact, by booing, you become down to their level. There are better ways of dealing with Russia. There are better ways of dealing with any society where change can. It's one of the reasons that, if you remember correctly, the Eurovision Song Contest was set up by Marcel Bezenko back in the 50s, which is to understand other countries, to understand different cultures.
Yeah, and I think that's not always what's happening right now. We've seen booing, as you said, for political reasons. We've seen it for different reasons, like with Sylvia Knight, where there's an outstanding act. And there is another one this year where I'm curious how the audience will react to that, which is the band from Finland.
Well, that depends on how their performance is going to be judged by both the professional judges as well as the audience. I can imagine that if you really want to assess the quality of the performance, by professional criteria, then ideally you would prefer a blind audition, because that will allow you to really listen to the song and not be distracted by, any, for example, behavioral oddities or unexpected behaviors that you might see on stage. And I think the audience will probably be a better judge of how to what extent they actually accept people with learning disabilities performing in a regular Eurovision Song Contest. So.
Possible sympathy votes for the band PKN for Finland at the Eurovision Song Contest. Sietse, what do you guys do to make sure that this contest actually stays a song contest and not a sympathy vote?
Well, I think if you cast your vote, you always have a certain sympathy, whether it's for the song, for the quality of the performance, for the artist, because it may be your favorite artist. Regardless of the song, you will just vote for your favorite artist. And that also applies to the Finnish entry. And people have the full freedom to decide what they vote for. Only rule is you cannot vote for your own country.
All right, Ewan, what do you think? Is this an entry that can attract a lot of sympathy votes, and how well can they do?
I think it's an entry that can actually do a lot of good. When you look at communities that deal with autism and deal with Down syndromes, they are so proud of this entry. They're saying to those people, autism is not a disability, it's a different wiring of the brain. And it's simply saying that you're part of society, you can be involved. PKN have been on the punk circuit for many years. They had an award-winning film last year going out on the indie circuit that went around the world. Should they be at Eurovision? Yes. Do you know why? Because they won the Finnish national final.
Exactly.
Sympathy votes, if we go through every single Eurovision, I'm sure that we could list each song that had the most potential for sympathy votes. And you know what? They'll be spread all over the running order. They'll be spread all over the final table. If everything was determined by sympathy votes, we would have been at Iceland about 3 times by now. We haven't been. Like everything, there are things that impact on the vote, but maybe only by 20 or 30 points. You need ballpark about 250 upwards to win the contest. So will Finland get some sympathy votes? Yes. Will Poland get some sympathy votes? Yes. Will the United Kingdom get some sympathy votes? Yes. Statistically, 1 in 9 people have some form of disability, which means in theory you have 5 acts that are affected by disability on stage in this contest. Why are we only talking about Finland?
Yeah, good question. Well, let me know. Tell me, what do you think of these other entries like Finland, but also Poland, also the UK? Which country do you rate as the highest contender?
Out of those 3?
Yes.
To win the contest?
Well, to reach as high as possible.
To reach as high as possible. I think they've all reached very, very highly. One band, one performer every year gets to sing for their country, to get a strap in the flag. There are countless people. There are 10,000 songs approximately every year that enter national finals around Europe and now beyond Europe. And we've got 40 here. So that is 0.4%. That's 0.4% of the entries are here at the Song Contest. We have the cream of new music here at Europe. They have already reached incredibly high. To say that somebody's a failure because they're 24th out of 10,000 instead of 23rd out of 10,000, I don't buy that argument. Eurovision's a huge opportunity no matter what you end up doing on a Saturday night.
I think regardless of the result, they've managed to put themselves on the European map. They will probably start the debate, the discussion, which I think is fundamentally good. A lot of people say, should this be the place where these discussions are being held? Probably yes. We don't want the Song Contest to be political, but just like last year, what you saw with Conchita Wurst is that you have entries that spark discussions of a more social nature, and this is just one of them. Just like people with mental disabilities, physical disabilities, it's interesting that the Song Contest can be a platform for that kind of discussion, and thereby I think it actually gives the Song Contest more flavor and also more value in society.
So in that case, you would say that the Finnish band in this sense has already reached very high, as you said, but how will they feel the same way? And does the EBU consider that for them, if they, for example, would not qualify for the final, how they will react to that, and if that may be different for them than, for example, other artists that have you guys taken any measurements for that, for like to accompany them well?
Well, they're being accompanied extremely well by the Finnish broadcaster Wiley. They're doing an outstanding job there. But every participant is going through a loss in a different way. There are professional artists that are really having a tough time dealing with, for example, not qualifying or not winning the song contest. And wherever they are in the spectrum, they will be properly supported by the broadcaster, by the people around them.
All right. Well, let's. You mentioned Pekan winning the Finnish preselection. Was that your favorite song in that preselection?
In a sense, yes, it was. But at the same time, for me, Angelo Denial was just huge over-the-top production number I would have loved to have seen taken to the Europe stage. Saturn Circus with Crossroads could well have been a band that would have broken out and been able to use Europe as a staging ground in the same way the previous entrants. Wiley's found a really good format in UMK to find new music. So even those bands and those performers that don't make it to Eurovision become very well established inside Finland. As I said, if we go back to that rough course number of 10,000, at some point along the way, every single one of those performers or bands or acts is going to lose. Even the person who eventually wins Eurovision, the album might flop in 2 years' time, and they'll be classed as a loser. It's how people overcome that adversity in any range of life is how they create success. If everybody goes in and goes, I'm going to do the best I can, I'm going to find my level, and then next year I'm going to try a little bit harder. I'm going to find all the positives and leave behind the negatives. Getting to Eurovision, not getting through the Saturday night, could be seen as a negative. But you would have been seen by semi-final, 40 to 45 million on the numbers, something along those lines. That's a huge number of people. If you can convert 1/10 of 1% of those people to your Facebook page and have them buy your album, that's 45,000 fans. That could be close. If each of those buy an album and you're making €5 off that, you're talking 225,000 euros. I'll take that as a loss every time. If you're going to let me lose, and by losing I can have the potential to earn the best part of €250,000, I'm going to lose every time.
So thousands of songs, not just in the Eurovision Song Contest here, but also in all the pre-selections. But not every country has a pre-selection. What's better, pre-selection or internal selection? We asked Daniel Gould.
You have to be sensible, and if you're not, then the public and the fans in that country are rightly going to be cross with your broadcaster for choosing badly. And the UK is a great example. The UK used to have a public selection, and the UK public occasionally chose something which they liked but wouldn't necessarily do well at Eurovision, and Scooch was the perfect example of that. And then the BBC decided to go with an internal selection, and this year they've chosen something which the fans in general didn't like. So it's a tough. If you do decide either way, you just have to make sure either you give the public a good choice if you're running a contest, which the BBC haven't always done, and now that they're internally selecting, they need to be really careful about what they choose, because that could go wrong too. So again, there's no right or wrong answer. There's just a serious approach to whatever decision you make.
That's Daniel's opinion on how pre-selection methods influence the results of Eurovision. But what preference do you guys as the EBU have? Would you rather have every country have a pre-selection?
We have a very strong opinion about that, and we are very much in favor for a public selection, a selection that engages the public. Because even though it's right, you can have a very good result in the Eurovision Song Contest with an internally selected entry. There are plenty of examples from history. But do you really connect with the audience in that way? Do you really build a brand? Because let's face it, it will be only once in a few decades that you win the Eurovision Song Contest. But in between those wins, you have to build and maintain and strengthen the brand. And we believe the only way, or the best way probably to do that, is through a strong national selection. For example, like they do in Sweden, like they now do in Finland as well.
But is it possible, Ewan? Can every country afford, not just financially, but also through popularity with the audience, to have their own national selection?
It depends on the hunger that you have with the broadcaster. You mentioned two factors there. One of them was cost. One of them was, for want of a better word, the engagement levels that are there with other parts of the mainstream media. There's a wide range of budgets and affordability that you have in Eurovision. Sweden has far more reserves of currency and income and the ability to put on a large show like Melody Festival and compared to, say, Montenegro. You know, there is an imbalance there in the power of currency. It's wonderful when you get to Eurovision because they each get 3 minutes, they each get the same amount of stage time. It's as level as playing field as we can get in the 21st century. But in terms of the national final, it's a balance between broadcasters. Montenegro could put on a national final, but it might mean that they could not do any more live music on their television for 3 months because they've burned up so much money. So while there is an ideal, as with everything in life, there's a practicality. So it really does depend, and some of them like to go for a single shot national final. Denmark's very good at that, puts all the money in one show, 10 songs, huge arena. Somebody like Latvia this year decided to bring it in-house, keep it in the TV studio with their Supernova format to find a different way of selecting
more shows,
the songs.
but
more
smaller.
songs, but in a smaller space.
But this Melody Festival has almost become a synonym for a national selection. But you can do a national selection with one artist and 2 songs, or 2 artists and 1 song even.
Well, to take
that is an opportunity to engage the public and to give them a say in who you are sending to represent your country, which is a pretty big deal to the Eurovision Song Contest.
But at the same time, if I was a broadcaster here, I might say, well, to run a national final will cost me, say, 175,000 euros. That would be comparable for one of the big 5 to run a one-night show using televoting that's done in studio. That money comes out of budgets for other programs that they also engage the other public as well. You can do it in an existing
program. The Irish are very effective in that.
Or an X Factor or a talent show.
But if we take the Irish example, we don't see any of the big names from Irish music actually enter. We don't see any of the up-and-coming bands. You know, if you go to a band like the Stripes in Ireland, they're going to go nowhere near the Late Late Show, which is predominantly an audience of over 50s, which is not the demographic that watches the song contest. While I understand it's great to have public input, and I agree in principle that there should be a public input, I think that the business of broadcasters is not just the Eurovision Song Contest. They have to take on all of their situations. They have to deal with very limited budgets. They have to essentially decide what's more important in engaging the audience with a Eurovision selection, or engaging the audience with a reality TV program, or engaging the audience with a charity telethon, or engaging the audience with a live episode of EastEnders. So there are many, many considerations that broadcasters take over and beyond the Eurovision Song Contest. They're advised very clearly by the EBU, but the EBU TV committee said that it is an advice, it's not a demand. That's correct.
Absolutely.
You know,
I'm going to quickly rhyme up because we're having time issues, but I'm going to ask you, just as at the end, what are you going to do the next couple of days? What is your second Eurovision week look like?
Well, we always joke the best thing is to sit behind our desk with our feet on the table, because that means we've done our job well over the past year. But of course it's not that romantic at all, because there are always little issues left and right to fix. Next week, obviously, when we have the dress rehearsals, the live shows will be very focused on the incoming jury results, of course the televoting, and of course, in the end, what it's all about, to deliver 3 grand TV shows to, in the end, an audience of some 200 million people.
Thanks a lot. Thanks Sietse, thanks Ewan for your participation here tonight. And thank you for watching. Later this week we'll be back with the next episode of the Esc Daily Show. In the meantime, follow our website, escdaily.com. We'll be covering all the Eurovision news there for you. Good night.